Thank you, firstly, to my sponsor, Australian Wool Innovation. You make so much possible in the wool industry, and I really appreciate the fact that you chose me as your scholar for 2022. To all my friends and family who supported me in my travels, thank you. I appreciate you more than I can express. So, carbon. It's a buzzword that we all know about, and I can almost feel the collective sigh and drop in energy when we talk about it. So I feel you and I understand how you feel. So as Felicity said, I farmed for 5 years producing wool and meat in the Midlands of Tasmania. We were a grazing operation and we focused on native vegetation restoration, fencing off areas and using really minimal inputs. So back when I was really naive to carbon accounting, I was offered to do a carbon account for the farm, and I was really excited because I thought it would, demonstrate all the environmental efforts that we'd done, and it would be like a really good positive story. So as you can probably guess, being a ruminant-based grazing operation, the results were terrible. At the time, it was about the only metric that anyone was interested in, and it seemed to be the only one that anyone cared about. I also discovered there could be negative unintended consequences with really chasing carbon neutrality down. So, we were told that there is an opportunity that farmers should create carbon credits to sell them. Sorry, I'm totally missing my spot here. Right, at the time we were told that there was this massive opportunity for farmers to create value from carbon, not only through a carbon neutral product, but also through carbon credits. With carbon credits, we would be able to sell them, we would be able to help stabilise the climate, and we would be able to have an income at times when things were tough. It did make me wonder, having gone through my own carbon audit, was this carbon opportunity as good as it sounded being sold to us by industry and government? Or were there some hidden details that would maybe have negative outcomes and consequences for farmers? So having entered the wild world and complex world of carbon accounting, it became apparent very quickly that we needed to look at more than just carbon as a metric. Since I've begun my research, there have been huge increases in projects and focus on extending things like natural capital accounting, which we heard from Ian this morning, and biodiversity. Our farm was actually one of the pilot farms that was the basis of the Farming for the Future program. As I travelled on my Nuffield, it became really clear to me that everyone was grappling with the same questions. What action should we do? How do we measure it? And where is the actual value for farmers or the producer in taking these actions? So in this omni-shambles of laws, policies, standards and frameworks, action for the farmers really boils down to risk management. Access to markets, insurance and finance are all reasons why you should take this seriously. We've heard this morning that although you may not get a premium, you may get a discount if you're not compliant. So let's unpack the opportunity of creating a carbon neutral product. On the surface, it's quite simple. All you do is work out what your emissions are, take any action that you can to abate those emissions and offset the rest. Not only will you save the world, but you will have this high-value product. So for wool production and any grazing operation, methane is going to be your biggest carbon emission. Our animals burp biogenic methane as a byproduct of digestion. It's already in the carbon cycle. We need to account for ours the same way that the fossil methane is accounted for. The difference being that ours is already in the carbon cycle, whereas fossil is dug up from the earth. Now, there is significant research being entered into in regards to methane reduction, and we've heard about a few of them this morning. I was able to visit some incredible people around the world that were doing some work in developing methane mitigation techniques. However, we are still a long way off from achieving a carbon neutral wool product. So let's have a look at the opportunity of carbon credits. When it comes to offsets and creating carbon neutral products, there are really a lot of examples of farmers being first movers. They carved out a really incredible space for their niche product with carbon and environmental claims. But what about commodity producers? What is the right action to take? When is the right time to move? And how do you get paid for these actions? So these are all questions I have considered, and you'll be pleased to know that I have distilled them down to one simple answer, and that is, it depends. Let's now consider selling carbon credits to help stabilise the climate and for an additional income. From an agricultural point of view, the changing climate is going to bring more extremes. And we've heard this morning that Australia is only just staying ahead of the curve with climate change. If you do choose to sell your carbon credits, just be aware that you can't offset them against your product. Carbon credits form the basis of the Australian net zero policies. And as farmers, we're told that we can produce carbon credits to offset our emissions, or we can sell our credits. The system established to sell credits is quite complex. Given this, companies known as aggregators have been set up to assist farmers. They often do it for free, and they either take a small payment or they want to take future credits as payments. They are where a lot of farmers get their information from on carbon. A handful of private companies now dominate this market, and they are increasingly influenced by fossil fuel companies. Of all the largest carbon aggregators dealing in carbon credit markets, they are now either part-owned by companies with major gas interests or count ex-resource executives as directors and major shareholders. But does this matter? It makes economic sense after all. If you have to offset, why not be involved in the production of credits? If credits are used to offset for one by one, it would stabilise the climate. The problem is the way the Australian government policy is set up, they only have to account for a small portion of their emissions. So if we look at liquefied natural gas, for one carbon offset, by the time the gas is exported and burnt, 8.4 tonnes of emissions have been released into the atmosphere. It is in the interest of the gas industries to hold the carbon price low. They are not interested in stabilising the climate for farmers, and additionally they are representing farmers and taking the narrative away from us. I know it can be overwhelming to hear this, and it can bring on solastalgia, a term coined to describe the depression that we feel when thinking about the climate crisis. I spoke to a farmer in Fresno, California. He's part of the second largest food producing region in America, and they've just been experiencing extreme drought. They have faced significant climate challenges which will threaten their ability to produce food. When I asked him how he was planning to adapt to climate change, he told me that he goes to church and prays. The opportunity, as I now see it, is not necessarily in making money from carbon neutral products, but it's going through the what ifs. It's understanding the frameworks and the structures that are being developed and put out there. It is knowing that all of these are under development and they are all created with or without your input. As I only had 5 minutes, I'm running a webinar next month to take a deeper dive on this. For anyone that would like to know more, it's on the final slide. But we need to know that you are the experts in your business. All of these frameworks are being developed, and you have a possibility now and a really amazing opportunity to influence those decisions. They will impact your business, and this is the opportunity for you to make these policies work for us and not against us. We made the world that we're living in, and we have an opportunity to remake it now.
Thanks, Colette. And I'm not sure that it's a sigh that you get from people that's anything other than intimidation, because to be honest, when I'm confronted with these questions, I find myself thinking, I know I need to do something, I just don't quite know what it is. So
why are you doing a Nuffield Scholarship?
I'm going to come to your seminar. I'm really hoping that webinar will be advertised outside the Nuffield cohort because it sounds fantastic to me. So can we ask you at this point, is there such a thing as a high integrity credit?
Okay, so, forgot about that question. How long have I got? Okay, so high integrity credits. There is a whole issue with methodologies, which I'm not actually going to go into because I think a really important issue with integrity of credits is actually who is the buyer and what are they going to do. So there's an analogy around credits being akin, if you're just looking at net zero, that you can almost akin them to murder credits. Andrew's like, don't use the word murder. Anyway, so you can imagine a great analogy is if you had a hospital and every time they saved a life, they were given a life-saving credit, okay? That credit can then be sold to anyone that would like to murder someone, and Australia would be net zero murders. Carbon credits are very similar. They're not having the impact that we think they are, and it's really important that we understand the structures so that we can make them work for us and not against us.
I absolutely love that explanation. It's terrifying, but it's great. It's quite crystallising. The other question I had for you, and this, because this really comes to the heart of a lot of stuff that I try and do in my life as well, which is how we as farmers actually make sure we're having an influence in this space so that we are there being part of the policy discussions that are going to then impact the way we do our business and the way Australia positions itself globally. If you could just do that one in 2 minutes, that'd be fantastic.
2 minutes, okay, sure. I think one of the problems that I've experienced travelling the world around this is that there's a lot of language and there's a lot of poor definitions in the language. And once you start to understand a bit of the definitions, it's easier to be like, that's what that means, and it's greenwashing or it's not. But it allows you to really unpick the policies, and I find that carbon literacy is really lacking. I sometimes read a term and I think, I wonder what that means, and it's really hard sometimes to unpick that. But the more carbon literate you are, the more you're able to talk about these problems and the more you're able to ask really good questions of people that are propositioning these policies to you. So, yeah.
Thank you very much, Colette.